Welcome to Only Murders in My Mind, a Random Thought production. Hi, I'm Carol Bissett, a crime writer, and I invite you with my co-presenters, Liz Hedgecock and Mike Jackson, each week to our conversations on all things murderous. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to this latest episode of Only Murders in My Mind. And once again, I'm in the studio with Liz Hedgecock.
Hello.
And Mike Jackson.
Hello there.
So you both okay?
Yes, fine, thank you.
Excellent,
so, yes.
excellent. That's the way to do it. We'll crack on with this one. We won't. I won't go off on a tangent like I normally do.
Oh, come on, Carol. Don't make promises you can't keep.
No, I can't keep them. You're right. Because this could. It's interesting, and I don't want to take away from the actual episode on Victorian crimes.
You're
again.
implying that some of our podcasts aren't interesting.
Yes.
No, more involved is probably the. It could take us down a rabbit hole or two. Just a little bit of background for the Victorian era, because it could be a time, depending on where you lived, of quite a lot of crime going on. Most of it would be classed as petty crime. There was an awful lot of pickpockets about. You've all seen Oliver Twist. You don't need me to tell you about that. And of course, there was no police until 1829, when the old Robert Peel, who was a politician, launched the first police in England.
Was that the Bow Street Runners?
Yeah, all the peelers.
All the peelers.
All the bobbies.
Yep.
So we're going to take this in order of age. We're going to discuss a crime each. So yours is the oldest one, isn't it, Liz?
Yes, it is, yes.
What Carol means is the crime's the oldest, not that Liz is the oldest. Just thought I'd clarify
Yeah,
that.
okay.
Thanks for that.
Yeah, the crime that Liz is going to talk about is the one that's furthest back.
Yes, I'm going back to 1847.
Right.
When two people met, and I'm not entirely sure they fell in love, to be quite honest. She was a lady's maid called Maria Deroux, and she met someone called Frederick Manning. And the thing was, apparently he wasn't the sharpest tool in the box, this Frederick Manning, and he'd recently been fired from a job as a train guard.
Right.
So, yeah, he wasn't a great prospect, but he told Maria that he was due to inherit a small fortune from his mother.
Always a good idea.
And so they got married. So he tried doing various things. He tried being a pub landlord. That didn't work out. And they ended up moving to small lodgings in Bermondsey. And this is where Maria found out that actually he told her a big fat lie and there was no fortune.
Oh, dear.
I know. And the thing was, back then, it wasn't like you could just, get divorced quickly. It was a whole protracted thing. And, if you're a woman particularly, it was much, much harder.
Yes, it was. It was for a long time.
Yes, exactly. I mean, in 1847, this is like way back
then.
Didn't
Didn't do it.
Yeah. So they were stuck with each other, basically. And they thought, well, what should we do? So they hatched a plot to get some money. Maria had been proposed to before Fred Manning got in there by someone called Patrick O'Connor, who was well off. But the thing is, she decided to go for Manning because of the fortune, which wasn't. But, Maria now realised she'd backed the wrong horse, but she decided, well, there's still possibly something here. So she invited O'Connor to dinner, and before he arrived, she bought a large shovel.
As you do.
Was it like being prepared?
Yeah. So basically, he arrived for dinner. She sent him into the kitchen to wash his hands, and while his back was turned, she shot him in the head. See, now I thought the shovel was going to be
I was going to say,
weapon. Yes, I know.
Where did the gun come from?
I have no idea. Probably a different shot from the shovel.
Right.
History does not relate. My source does not tell me. So anyway, then her husband comes in to find this bloke half dead on the floor and finishes the job off.
With a...
Doesn't say. I'm going to guess it was the shovel. This is like Cluedo, isn't it? It was one of the Mannings in the kitchen with something or other. We don't know where they got it from. So anyway, they buried O'Connor, presumably with the shovel this time.
He was definitely dead.
Yes, I think he was most definitely dead.
We're not helping Liz at all with this
And
story,
get
are we?
this, Maria then goes round to this dead guy's house and starts collecting all his stuff, which seems to me to be a bit of a daft thing to do.
Where were her brains?
I have no idea. Maybe she buried them with a shovel at the same time.
Don't forget, this is the woman who was conned into thinking that her husband had a fortune.
Yeah, true.
You know.
Yes, indeed, there is this.
And you did say that he wasn't the brightest knife in the drawer, so it does say something about
If he
her.
managed to con her, then yes, it would probably... Yeah, exactly. So anyway, the police soon got involved, and their suspicions pointed to the Mannings. They planned to flee. Maria sent her husband to sell their furniture so that they'd have some money to go on the run with. As soon as he left the house, she took everything that was valuable and did a runner.
It.
Yeah, she legged it. So yes, Frederick got home, realised what Maria had done, managed to escape just before the police reached the Manning residence, where they found the body covered in lime under the kitchen floorboards.
Oh, dear God.
Yeah, I know. They didn't even think to take it somewhere. So they split up, which is the best bit, and they fled. One of them went to Edinburgh.
Okay.
And one of them went to Jersey. So, I mean, to be fair, that's probably the smartest thing they've done so far.
Yes.
They were caught within days.
It wasn't that smart then.
Well, you know. Well, apparently, Maria had been trying to sell Patrick O'Connor's belongings,
Right.
which I imagine drew some attention.
Might point the finger at her.
Yeah. And Frederick apparently got so drunk that people started, he drew attention to himself, and that was the end of it. So anyway, the trial was at the Old Bailey, 1849, and it was a sensation. Apparently Maria was immaculately dressed and elegant throughout. And she was very composed, which I wasn't expecting, actually, given the previous. But apparently, once the jury said guilty, she stood up and screamed at the court, quote, "You have treated me like a wild beast of the forest." I know, this is great, isn't it? So they were both sentenced to be hung. And that apparently was very, very rare for a married couple to be hung together.
Oh, yeah.
So that caused an absolute sensation because it had been over 100 years since this had happened. So apparently there was a cottage industry set up with people selling standing room tickets to the hanging. And there were broadsides, Victorian one-sheet newspapers dedicated to the execution being sold.
Oh.
So they're the kind of thing. I've got an example here. And it's got a big headline, "Life of the Mannings, executed at Horsemonger Lane jail." Actually, it says goal, but you know what it means. And it's got a picture of the pair of them.
Oh, dear.
Being hung with a big crowd in attendance. And then you've got a big poem underneath. So I'll read you the first bit of it. "See the scaffold, it is mounted, and the doomed ones do appear. Seemingly born one with sorrow, grief and anguish, care and pain. They cried, the moment is approaching when we together must leave this life. And no one has the least compassion on Frederick Manning and his wife."
Way. Bit like
There
Bonnie
you
and
go.
Clyde, really.
Yeah. How big do you think the crowd was to watch them be hung?
10,000?
Higher?
20.
Higher.
Go on.
Between 30 and 50,000 people
Wow.
turned out to watch it.
Goodness.
The biggest crowd ever assembled at an execution.
Oh.
And there was a huge amount of gossip on whether the pair of them would reconcile on the scaffold. It's like Love Island or something, isn't it? And B, what Maria Manning was going to wear to the execution.
Oh, they
But
should,
yes,
should make a film of that.
Apparently
shouldn't
she wore close-fitting black satin. There you go.
they? I'm so glad.
I know. And then they had waxworks of them.
Madame Tussauds.
Madame Tussauds,
Tussauds.
yes. Yes,
Well,
absolutely.
they were, I was going to say famous, they were infamous.
They
weren't
were,
Yes,
weren't they?
and Maria Manning went on to inspire Charles Dickens, who was fascinated, and went on to create Mademoiselle Hortense in Bleak House, who was based on Maria Manning.
Manning.
So there you go. She lives on in literature.
Oh.
Yeah.
But
And
yeah,
I'd never heard of them.
I know. Well, I wanted to talk about it because this whole, sensation that grew up around them, and this like fever and like the whole press thing,
Yeah.
and I thought it was really interesting. You should don't think about this sort of thing happening back then.
No,
do you?
no. And I remember when, because
you think of mass media as being a modern thing.
Yeah, and it happened a lot with Jack the Ripper as well. The papers were selling like hotcakes because
it's the
of
gossip.
that. Yeah. People couldn't get enough of it.
It is no different today. We still gossip as much today, but we do it through
Social
Twitter
media.
and Instagram and all the rest of it, WhatsApp, and we do it through social media. Where back there was only one way of doing it, and that was either word of mouth or
a newspaper.
The newspapers or the broadsheets.
Yes.
Yeah.
That was fascinating.
Yeah, because the broadsheets were cheap, weren't they? So were accessible to
everybody.
Yeah.
everybody.
I mean, there were things like penny dreadfuls as well, weren't there? And I mean, it was cheap. And also, I imagine it was the sort of thing where even if you couldn't read, maybe a group of you could club together, and the one who could read would read it to the rest of you.
Yes, that's probably what would happen, isn't it? God.
Yeah.
Can you top that then, Mike?
I can put a bit more goriness into mine, if you like.
What date was yours?
The murder happened in 1879. So it's still in the reign of Queen Victoria, but a bit later.
30 years later.
30 years later. The murderer is Kate Webster. It's called Kate Webster and the Richmond Murder. And this Kate Webster came across from Ireland and got an employment with a Julia Thomas, a 55-year-old widow living in Richmond. And their relationship was a bit stormy. As a domestic servant, she was unreliable, had a bit of a temper. So there were frequent quarrels. And apparently after a heated argument, Webster murdered Julia Thomas by pushing her down the stairs and strangling her. And this crime occurred on a Sunday evening after Mrs. Thomas returned from church. Webster then dismembered the body with a razor and a saw, and she boiled the remains, I told you I could make this, in a copper laundry cauldron and burnt the bones in the hearth. And
she was very thorough, wasn't she?
She later described her actions. So there was actually recorded evidence of what she said. And she said, "I determined to do away with the body as best I could. I chopped the head from the body with the assistance of a razor, which I used to cut through the flesh afterwards. I also used the meat saw and the carving knife to cut the body up. I prepared the copper with water to boil the body to prevent identity. And as soon as I had succeeded in cutting it up, I placed it in the copper and boiled it. I opened the stomach with a carving knife and burned up as much of the parts as I could."
Ugh.
Oh dear.
That is very, very thorough.
Yeah.
I mean, she's really thought about this.
Oh, yes. And over the next couple of days, this Webster carried on cleaning the house and Thomas's clothes and put on a show of normality for the people who called for orders, And behind the scenes, she was packing the dismembered remains into a black Gladstone bag and a wooden bonnet box. And she couldn't put the murdered woman's head and one of the feet into the containers, so she disposed of them separately, throwing the foot into a rubbish heap in Twickenham, and the head she buried under the stables in a pub called the Hole in the Wall, which is just a short distance away. She tried to cover up the crime by attempting to take over sort of Thomas's identity. She wore her clothes and jewellery and started selling her possessions. And she posed as the owner and tried to rent out the house as well. But things started to come apart. The body parts were discovered by a coal porter named Henry Wheatley, who reported to the police. He found a box that had been washed up on the banks of the Thames. He recovered the box, opened it up, finding that it contained what looked like body parts wrapped in brown paper. Obviously, the police were called. The bits and pieces, remains, were examined by a doctor who found they consisted of the trunk minus the entrails, legs minus 1 foot of a woman. The head was missing and was later assumed to have been thrown into the Thames separately. After a short time, the human foot and the ankle were found in Twickenham, and it was clear that all the remains belonged to the same corpse. But there was nothing to connect them with Thomas. There was no means to identify
No,
the bits and
no.
pieces. It was later alleged that Webster had offered 2 pots of lard to a neighbour,
Oh no.
supposed to have been rendered from Thomas's boiled fat.
Oh no.
However, there was no evidence this actually
that's so
happened.
horrible.
Anyway, this Webster continued to live at the house, posing as Thomas, and when the neighbours became suspicious. And when they did, she fled back to Ireland. When the police were called and searched the house, they discovered bloodstains, burned finger bones in the hearth, and fatty deposits behind the copper.
Oh, dear goodness.
When she was arrested, she denied everything. But under pressure, she confessed, and her trial at the Old Bailey was highly publicised. Again,
Yeah.
it was big news.
Drama.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The court was presented with her detailed confession and evidence, including witness testimonies. And she was found guilty and sentenced to death. She was executed by hanging on the 29th of July 1879 at Wandsworth Prison, making her one of the last women to be publicly executed in Britain. After her death, was certified she was buried in an unmarked grave in one of the prison's exercise yards, and the crowd waiting outside cheered as a black flag was raised over the prison walls, signifying that the death sentence had been carried out. And it's funny how things go full circle. My dad was a builder, but late in life. When he was just before he was 40, he decided to join the prison service.
Yeah.
He was a carpenter by trade, and he did that in prison. And one of the first prisons he was at as a sort of trainee prison officer was Wandsworth. And at night, one of his jobs was to patrol and walk past these graves.
Oh.
And he said he always swore they seemed a bit longer than anybody else's grave because they'd all been hung.
Oh.
But this has another twist in it. In 2010, workers were renovating the garden of David Attenborough. He had a property in Richmond. And while they were renovating it, they discovered a skull.
Oh.
And the house was situated between this cottage where the murder had taken place, which still stands today, and the hole in the wall pub.
Oh, is it her head?
On 22nd of October, workmen carrying out excavation work at the rear of the old pub uncovered a dark circular object, which turned out to be a woman's skull. It had been buried underneath foundations that had been in place for at least 40 years.
I was going to say, I hope it is the same head. I mean, that would have been there two, if not.
It was speculated that the skull was Thomas's, and the coroner asked Richmond police to carry out an investigation into the identity and circumstances. And the forensic examination confirmed the skull belonged to a middle-aged woman and was consistent with Thomas's age.
There you
That
go.
was very...
Well, you wanted a bit more gruesome, so I gave you a bit more gruesome.
Yes, that's true.
Yeah, this is very true.
But the similarities aren't there. The fact that it was
yeah,
a public execution, except the crowds didn't actually see it.
yeah,
I suppose time had moved on.
yeah,
But it was still that publicity. I should imagine the broadsheets and the
Oh,
newspapers
yeah.
yes.
would have been full of it.
People crying for blood. It takes you back to the Romans and the...
Well, it's the goriness that, if that was part of her confession, you can guarantee that would have been in all the papers and
Oh
everything.
yeah,
Oh, yeah.
And people would have lapped that up, And that bit about the, offering the neighbour 2 pots of lard.
It's like,
oh, that's
Even if it's not true,
Sweeney Todd,
Yeah.
isn't it?
it would have, as they say today, that would have sold papers. That would have sold
Oh,
newspapers.
oh, yeah.
it would.
Yeah.
So how did they catch her?
It doesn't. I couldn't find that out. It just that she'd gone back to Ireland.
Yeah,
There must have been some sort of a trail.
Yes,
That would
I
have
can
done
only
to
assume
her.
a bit like the one that you read about, talked about. People would have got suspected why she come back.
yeah,
And it only takes one person to say something to a policeman. But I'm assuming the police would have put out some sort of wanted posters, or to the whole country. We are looking for this woman.
Yeah.
And it wouldn't have taken much for some little town
Yeah,
in Ireland.
She could have boasted about it to a close friend or something.
Yeah,
as
she
well.
seemed very confident.
Yeah.
The way that she carried on. I mean, taking on this
very
person's
methodical. Yeah,
but taking on this person's
persona.
persona.
Yeah.
Wearing her clothes and jewellery. I mean, she's
You
almost.
think somebody had cottoned on sooner?
That
Yeah.
feels like a schoolgirl error, I
Yes,
suppose.
it does, doesn't
yeah.
it? And somebody did cotton on. But,
Yeah,
but,
yeah.
yeah.
but somebody, she obviously felt as though
Yeah.
she'd get away with it. A bit like the couple they thought they were going to get away with it.
Yeah.
Didn't they?
I mean, the thing is, if she just packed
And gone.
yes. packed a bag with what she could carry and just, gone off and said,
Yeah.
oh, I'm visiting, I'm visiting family or something, then probably no one would have thought thing of
No,
her. But
I take
Because
it out of the.
The thing is that nobody with this one couldn't identify the body parts.
yeah.
So if she'd gone off, there was no evidence to say that
Yeah,
these
but
body
she-
parts were this woman, and that's why I'm surprised that she confessed.
She scattered them far and wide.
She did,
didn't
yeah.
When
She
you
was
think
very,
about
as you
it.
say, very methodical,
Mm.
and yet
Ugh.
quite prepared to own up to it.
Well,
She obviously didn't have a good
it
solicitor.
says under pressure. I'm just wondering
What sort of pressure?
Yeah,
Yes. Yeah. Because times were slightly different there. weren't
they
they?
were.
Yes, so there might have been a bit of yes.
Yeah, I don't think there was a sort of solicitor sat next to you saying, "Just say no comment. Just say no comment." I don't think that would have happened.
No, that wouldn't have
Really?
worked, would it? Well,
What's your case?
well, carrying on from that, it's a similar sort of thing. The Thames Torso murders.
Ooh,
So
this is going to be pleasant. I
yeah,
can tell.
yeah.
More bits and pieces.
Again, this is
Yuck.
an unsolved crime, so I haven't got an awful lot. You've both got a lot of detail, which is really interesting. But this happened from October 1884, when parts of women,
Ugh.
their bodies were
It's
found.
always women.
Yeah, in and
Yes.
around Tottenham Court Road and Bedford Square. So,
Isn't Bedford Square quite nice?
well, I suppose it is now. I presume it was then. I don't know.
Mm.
This happened through May and June, and the thing that made me want to talk about this was it was happening around the same time as Jack the Ripper was out there.
Mm.
And they did think that the dissections had been done by somebody with medical experience.
Ugh.
So was this Jack the Ripper? The MO's different.
Right.
I know that because Jack the Ripper killed people where he found them, basically, didn't he? Attacked them and killed them where they were. But could this be another side of him? Because this was a very short-lived, sort of crime timeline. In 1889, a heavily pregnant woman's torso was found in the Thames. She was the only one that was ever identified as Elizabeth Jackson, and she was a homeless sex worker. And they presumed that the other body parts they'd found probably belonged to the women who were in the same sort of business, if you like.
Mm-hmm.
And the final parts were found in 1889 in Whitechapel. So
Whitechapel, eh?
to me, there might be a link between this and Jack the Ripper, because, as I say, we never found out who, and they all stopped around the same time.
Mm.
So was this an escalation for Jack the Ripper? Was it something where he was, I don't know, was it some sort of mad medical student dissecting bodies?
It could be somebody copycat type.
It
crime
could,
as well.
exactly.
Yeah.
That's the thing. We didn't talk about that sort of thing then. Many were of the opinion that the murderer had medical knowledge, but this case was never solved. So that's all I've got on that. But as I say, I found it interesting because of the link. Well, not the link, but the timescale. The timescale with Jack
for me,
the
it's
Ripper.
quite odd because I've just been looking up Bedford Square, and it is a nice area.
Yeah.
It's kind of part of Belgravia. It's
Yeah.
just by the British Museum.
Yeah.
And it's not the sort of place you would imagine this sort
Found
of
bits
thing
of bodies.
happening. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's just this thing as well about carrying bits of body around and then just like throwing it somewhere.
Yeah.
Tottenham Court Road now, you get off at Euston, you're on Tottenham Court Road, and it's only a short walk up to King's Cross station.
Yeah.
Now, the whole of King's Cross, it's all been done up now, it's beautiful, but before, not many years ago, the whole of King's Cross area was very much an area for sex workers.
Yes. Yeah.
So that whole area around there, even if that Bedford was nice, it's surrounded by
Yes.
a rougher area.
An
Yeah.
area where
Yeah.
there was
So
a lot of prostitution.
I found that absolutely fascinating. As I say, I've got a real sort of interest in the Jack the Ripper murders, as have many people. And I saw this and I thought, I wonder. I mean, somebody else must have thought there might be a link somewhere along the line. I can't be the only person.
Well,
that
that's the thing.
thought
I mean,
that.
Jack the Ripper was, again, very,
Yeah, sold
very
papers.
much in the media.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
and probably, they whipped up a lot of, frenzy about it to sell more papers.
And maybe this person got away with it because of Jack the Ripper, because that was more high profile.
Yeah.
You know.
It's surprising, isn't it? I mean, I'm just going off on a tangent here. I know that's something we never never do
and
on this
Carol promised
podcast.
we wouldn't.
And yes, you did. But in a recent podcast episode, we were talking about board games, and I was surprised that a very popular board game is Jack the Ripper.
Is it?
Yeah,
I must get
which I find quite bizarre.
What happens in this? Oh, I don't even want to think about this.
I think you are Jack the Ripper. I don't know. I don't know. It's just one of the things I noticed when I was doing some research for that. But going back to something that I don't know whether Carol or Liz said it, how it's the women who seem to get murdered. Certainly in all the cases that we mentioned, that's the case. But also in at least two of the cases we mentioned, the women were the murderers as well. It wasn't always men murdering women.
I mean, to be fair, in the case that I was talking about, it was a man who got murdered.
That's
But
right.
The woman was, she was the focus of the interest.
Yes.
What's Maria going to be wearing?
I like that.
Are they going to get back together just before they get hung?
Yeah, I forgive you, darling.
Yes.
Yeah. And when we did the last one on Victorian crime, and I did some research, I was amazed how many sort of serial killers there were that were females. There was the woman that killed all the children and everything, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Is it possibly something to do with there being more poison about?
I think it probably was, because they always said poison was a woman's way of killing people, because it was easy to transport and it was easy to get, wasn't it? You could go into
you
Easy to
get
get.
all sorts from over the counter at your local
and easy to
pharmacist.
administer.
Yeah, well, exactly. You drop it
in
into
many different
some.
ways.
Yeah, I mean, if nothing else, you could just go and get like a pack of fly papers and you were sorted.
Yeah.
So yeah,
I mean, it's not that long ago that you could still buy over the counter kaolin and morphine for stomach upsets, and it really worked. And I wonder why.
Yeah.
And then for some reason,
well, if it didn't, you probably didn't care, did you?
no, they stopped it. But you could, when I was young, you could buy morphine in different medicines over the counter. And as I say, that's just a gradual decline in how you could get this. But now with the dark web, you can still get some of these deadly poisons without anybody, if you know your way around the dark web.
But the thing is, there's a barrier there.
She's worrying me now.
The thing is, though, you'd have to know how to get onto the dark web.
That's what's worrying
and
me.
how to do it undetected. And I mean, it's still a barrier. I mean, yes, if you're very savvy about these things, then you can do it. But I mean, I wouldn't have a clue.
No, neither would I. Neither would I.
I mean, you have talked about the dark web in your books.
Yes.
Actually, so have I, to be fair. But
if I'd known, I wouldn't have had that last cake.
I'm sure it was fine, Mike. I wouldn't worry about it. And that big shovel in the hall is just nothing to do with anything.
That's snow. It's a snow shovel.
Shovel.
Of course it is.
Yeah. The pistol that she's carrying that's worrying me slightly.
No, it's a candlestick. I've got one of them.
Well, that's worse. I mean, that's a kudo thing.
Going on to a more serious point. I can quite happily talk about Victorian real life murder, and I think there was some humour in it, and we're certainly laughing
it's fascinating
at the way that they acted in the story that Liz told us. I couldn't do the same with modern real life.
No,
I couldn't go down that road.
No. That would
I know
be quite...
you can, Carol. You enjoy.
I find it fascinating from the psychological point of view of the murderer.
Yes.
The when you get to...
I think it's when it's close to something like Victorian crime seems... It was a long time ago.
Yes,
so
it's nothing to do with us.
It almost doesn't feel real.
Yeah,
whereas modern day murder does feel very real.
Because... psychology of serial killers I find absolutely fascinating. Yeah. So I could talk about it, but I think it'd be quite depressing.
Yes.
We don't want to depress you. We don't want to depress you.
This is
Well,
true.
that's not true. If we could depress you, we would. But
Speak for yourself.
And on that note, I think we'll draw it to a close.
Probably wise.
Oh, well, thank you again for listening. Hope you've enjoyed this. And as I say, please, if there's something you'd like us to talk about, and it's legal.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks for putting that in.
Yeah,
Probably
in other words, if you want us to get Carol to talk to you in detail about the dark web, no, we're not going to do that.
No, there are some things, as Mike said, that we wouldn't do because we don't think it's right. But we're always open for suggestions on things we could do. So if you've something you think you'd like to hear us talk about, please let us know. And join. Have a look at our blog, which Mike produces every week because it is excellent. Okay, everyone. So we'll see you next week.
Indeed.
Okay.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
You have been listening to Only Murders in My Mind, a Random Thought production, produced by John Bissett. The music in Peril was composed and recorded by OM Studio Strings.